If a rational person tries to apply their logic while trying to understand the reason for an objective or act of a psychopath, they will fail. This will be explained in more detail later. Likewise, when a rational person hears the possibility that a massive lie has been told to a population by a trusted leader, and they attempt to use their logic to determine whether or not such a lie is possible, they will actually, and usually, not believe the truth, that they have fallen for a huge lie. The reason for this is that although most of us can identify with small lies, we find it difficult to conclude that such a massive lie is possible. When I use the term massive lie, I don't just mean a complete falsehood regarding a major event, but also the scope of its influence, global, and the amount of people that have fallen for it. In his book, The Mask of Sanity, Dr. Herbie Cleckley says that even during the most solemn perjuries, they show no difficulty at all looking anyone tranquilly in the eyes. He adds that they will lie about any matter, under any circumstances. He explains that it is difficult to express how completely straightforward they appear when telling a blatant lie. The great masses of people will more easily fall victims to a big lie than to a small one. Lying, deceiving, and manipulation are natural talents for psychopaths, agreed Dr. Robert Hare in his book Without Conscience. When caught in a lie, or challenged with the truth, they are seldom perplexed or embarrassed. They simply change their stories or attempt to rework the facts so that they appear to be consistent with the lie. Psychopaths are always able to justify their actions, no matter how brutal. They have an ability to rationalize their behavior so that it appears warranted, reasonable, and justified, says Dr. Cleckley. Dr. Hare added, psychopaths show a stunning lack of concern for the devastating effects their actions have on others. Often, they are completely forthright about the matter, calmly stating that they have no sense of guilt and are not sorry for the pain and destruction they have caused, which, says Dr. Hare, is associated with a remarkable ability to rationalize their behavior. Psychopathy is usually untreatable. Most therapists won't work with them because they often end up damaged in the process. Dr. Hare explained, such counseling would be wasted on psychopaths. Some of them will even reflect the wishes of the therapist and pretend to be getting better. In his book, People of the Lie, psychiatrist Dr. Scott Peck had this to say, among themselves, therapists will not infrequently refer to a patient's psychopathology as being overwhelming. We mean this literally. We literally feel overwhelmed by the labyrinthine mass of lies and twisted motives, into which we will be drawn if we attempt to work with such people. Wikipedia describes that traditional therapeutic approaches usually make psychopaths, if not worse, far more adept at manipulating others and concealing their behavior. They are generally considered to be not only incurable, but also untreatable. Basically, psychopaths are the way they are for life. In most legal jurisdictions, they are considered sane, so technically, they're not mentally ill, just different. Dr. Scott Peck concludes, I have learned nothing in 20 years that would suggest that evil people can be rapidly influenced by any means other than raw power. They do not respond, he says, to either gentle kindness or any form of spiritual persuasion with which I am familiar with. When people hear the word psychopath, most of them think of the famous serial killers locked away in prison. However, most don't end up in prison or mental hospitals. Dr. Cleckley wrote, the true difference between them and the psychopaths who continually go to jails or to psychiatric hospitals is that they keep up a far better and more consistent outward appearance of being normal. This outward appearance, says Dr. Cleckley, is essentially a mask which may include business or professional careers that continue in a sense successful, and which are truly successful when measured by financial reward or by the casual observer's opinion of real accomplishment. Many psychopaths never go to prison or any other facility, agreed Dr. Hare. They appear to function reasonably well as lawyers, doctors, psychiatrists, academics, mercenaries, police officers, cult leaders, military personnel, business people, writers, artists, entertainers, and so forth, without breaking the law. He continued, their intelligence, family background, social skills, and circumstances permit them to construct a facade of normalcy. Most psychopaths are not just right in your churches, schools, charitable organizations, and workplaces, but by their very nature, they are likely running them. It is a core trait of the psychopath to place themselves in positions of influence, not for public service, but for power. The experience of pleasure is not reciprocal for the psychopath, stated Dr. Malloy. It is available only through sadistic channels of power and control. Achieving power for the sake of having power is the nature of the psychopath. They love to have power and control over others, agreed Dr. Hare. The need for absolute power over others and the wish to inflict pain for the enjoyment of watching others suffer is almost never apparent to the casual observer. The reason for this is that another core trait of the psychopath is disguise. So unfortunately, these individuals usually mask themselves as good-natured people. If they have tremendous wealth, you can bet they'll create charitable organizations as part of their mask. They are well aware that their mental makeup is drastically different from the majority. They have a sixth sense for detecting and exploiting any weakness you may have. At a very early age, they learn that they can inflict mental and emotional harm on others with ease. They also learn how to detect others like themselves out of a crowd of normal people. Beginning in their childhood, most of them learn to mimic normal emotional reactions in order to blend in with society. Psychopaths are not higher functioning than anyone else. They lack empathy, but unfortunately for them, empathy is governed by mirror neurons, and sociopaths lack these to a greater or lesser extent as well, and mirror neurons govern learning by observation. This means they have a severe learning disability. Much is made about how suave and charming sociopaths are. They use superficial mannerisms to get what they want. However, due to their incompetence at learning, they have little recourse when they cannot sleaze their way past a problem. The majority of sociopaths wind up having their kids taken away by CPS, in the bottom rungs of society, or in prison, and all the while, they will blame somebody else. Sociopath Master Race. An article on Dr. Hare's website called Psychopaths Among Us by Robert Hertz describes how Dr. Hare was contacted by Nicole Kidman, who wanted his advice on how to play the part of a psychopath for her film Malice. Dr. Hare uses the anecdote of a psychopath who had just witnessed an accident where a mother watched her child get killed by a car. There's blood all over the place, and the psychopath experiences no emotion, but instead is trying to avoid getting blood on her shoes. The psychopath notices the mother's emotional reaction to the accident and is fascinated. She goes home, looks in the mirror, and begins to mimic the facial expressions of the mother. That's the psychopath, revealed Dr. Hare. Wikipedia states that any emotions which the primary psychopath exhibits are the fruits of watching and mimicking other people's emotions. They are adept at using their charm and chameleon-like abilities to cut a wide swath through society, leaving a wake of ruined lives behind them, Dr. Hare warns. More often than not, says Dr. Cleckley, the typical psychopath will seem particularly agreeable and make a distinctly positive impression when he is first encountered. Alert and friendly in his attitude, he is easy to talk with and seems to have a good many genuine interests. There's nothing at all odd or queer about him, and in every respect, he tends to embody the concept of a well-adjusted, happy person. Psychopaths are often witty and articulate, concurred Dr. Hare. They can be amusing and entertaining conversationalists, ready with quick and clever comebacks, and can tell unlikely but convincing stories that cast themselves in a good light. They can be very effective in presenting themselves well and are often very likable and charming. Remember, most of them don't physically hurt people, so this is about mental and emotional domination. To accomplish these objectives, they will use their mask of sanity to place themselves in positions within your community. These positions may include school boards, charitable organizations, church, politics, law enforcement, or any position which they believe will offer them power over others. These are the places where most psychopaths end up, not jail. Researchers agree that the traits exhibited by these people produce a division stronger than age, race, and religion, which places them in a new category of people. In other words, these people are almost not human as we know it. The word antisocial does not describe someone who prefers to sit at home rather than attend gatherings. More accurately, it means anti-human. Most people can't bring themselves to understand the mindset of a psychopath. Dr. Hare explained, imagining the world as the psychopath experiences it is close to impossible. In his book, Political Ponerology, a science on the nature of evil adjusted for political purposes, Dr. Andrew wrote, The pathocratic world, the world of pathological egotism and terror, is so difficult to understand for people raised outside the scope of this phenomenon that they often manifest childlike naivete, even if they have studied psychopathology and are psychologists by profession. But if you can try to imagine someone who seeks power for no reason other than to have power, or someone who deceives just to experience the delight of having done so, or someone who tortures another person physically or emotionally for the enjoyment of watching them suffer. Imagine someone doing these things and not losing a moment of sleep at night, zero remorse, and add to all this the ability to conceal themselves from an extremely naive public. Psychopaths are essentially aliens that look human. Probably one of the best skills to learn is how to detect and avoid a psychopath. The typical person, of whatever nationality, wants only to enjoy success in his job, to be able to afford a reasonably high standard of living complete with leisure and travel, describes Gary Allen. He wants to provide for his family in sickness and in health, and to give his children a sound education. His ambition stops there, says Allen. He has no desire to exercise power over others, to conquer others' lands or peoples, or to be king. He continues, since he has no lust for power, it is difficult for him to imagine that there are others who have, and who march to a far different drum. He asks, why should we assume there are no such men today with perverted lust for power? In my opinion, we shouldn't, because we know that they exist, and consist of about 4% of the population during any period. And if these men happen to be billionaires, ponders Allen, is it not possible that they would use men like Hitler and Lenin as pawns to seize power for themselves? As I've demonstrated, true history supports this claim exactly. Dr. Hare refers to them as intraspecies predators. There is a class of individuals who have been around forever and who are found in every race, culture, society, and walk of life, he says. If you think about it, he adds, you will realize that what is missing in this picture are the very qualities that allow human beings to live in social harmony. It's not a pretty picture, he warns, and some express doubt that such people exist. A 2005 report titled Antisocial Personality, Sociopathy, and Psychopathy by North Carolina Wesleyan College describes them as morally depraved individuals who represent the monsters in our society. They are unstoppable and untreatable predators whose violence is planned, purposeful, and emotionless. In addition to carrying our goal-oriented acts, the psychopath will also deceive and create chaos for no reason other than the enjoyment of doing so. He will, says Dr. Cleckley, in fact commit such deeds in the absence of any apparent goal at all. This critical factor is often the one which baffles most rational people. When seeking an explanation for the behavior of a psychopath, they will attempt to apply reason, but when dealing with a psychopath, we must understand that psychopathy is the reason. One day, a scorpion and a frog were by a river's edge, and both needed to get across to the other side. The scorpion said to the frog, Mr. Frog, would you be so kind as to let me on your back as you swim across this river? I have important business to conduct on the other side, and I cannot swim in such a strong current. The frog was a little perturbed, and so began to question the scorpion's motives. The frog spoke. Mr. Scorpion, while I can appreciate the fact that you have business to conduct on the other side of the river, please, consider what you are saying. You are a scorpion. You have a large stinger at the end of your tail. As soon as I let you on my back, you will proceed to sting me, which I might add is your nature. The scorpion, ready for this, replied, My dear Mr. Frog, it is clearly not in my interest to sting you at all. I do need to get to the other side, and I promise that no harm will come to you. Well, this made a great deal of sense to the frog, so the scorpion crawled on his back to make the trek across the river. The frog was making good time getting across, when all of a sudden, in the middle of the river no less, the scorpion began to sting the frog repeatedly. The frog, shocked at this development, cried, Why, oh why are you doing this? You said you needed to get to the other side to conduct your business. The scorpion replied casually, Mr. Frog, you said it yourself. I am a scorpion. I have a large stinger at the end of my tail, and yes, it is in my nature to sting you. If this 4% of the population exists at all levels of society at any given period, is it possible that some would seek top positions of influence? Of course. Remember, a need for absolute power over others is a core trait of the psychopath. Goal-oriented deceitfulness, superficial charm, an outward friendly appearance, and having no remorse are other traits which will allow them to achieve their goals. If they are also people of tremendous wealth, they will definitely use this to further their objectives, and because deceitfulness is a core psychopathic trait, this will probably be done by creating a humanitarian front organization. Evil people are often busy building for themselves various fronts for disguise and to further their ambitions. Dr. Peck described, they are likely to exert themselves more than most in their continuing effort to obtain and maintain an image of high respectability. So unlike in the movies, evil does not reveal itself as the bad guy dressed in black or the monster in plain sight. Evil will very rarely expose itself to public light. It must hide, and it almost always hides under the guise of something righteous. In fact, rather than hiding in the shadows dressed in black, it disguises itself in suits, uniforms, and charitable organizations, which allow it to deceive us into thinking it's our savior. This enables it to cause far greater damage. While evil may manifest itself obviously, it rarely does so, Dr. Peck proclaimed, and added, those who are evil are masters of disguise. Now, let's examine the track record of the people who control the planet. They have created wars for profit and control, which have resulted in the deaths of millions, if not billions, of people, for which they exhibit no remorse. They've allowed attacks to occur, created depressions, and overthrown governments to further their ambitions. They have repeatedly lied about these events using the media, which they control, and academia, which they also control by their tax-exempt foundations. These wealthy people masquerade as the saviors of society. They disguise themselves using public front organizations, which appear to be humanitarian in nature. They've repeatedly not only lied about major historical events, but have deliberately created these catastrophes for their own benefit. Their own publications indicate that they plan to install a global dictatorship with them in complete control. These people are textbook psychopaths. They are anti-human. Compared to regular law-breaking criminals, these people appear to be okay on the surface. But as we've learned, lies, deception, and disguise are standard traits of those who are evil. They come from the very highest social strata, wrote Allen. They are immensely wealthy, highly educated, and extremely cultured. Many of them have lifelong reputations for philanthropy. Nobody enjoys being put in the position of accusing prominent people of conspiring to enslave their fellow Americans, but the facts are inescapable. If you were to research the people throughout history that have committed atrocities against populations, you would probably find that most were psychopaths. Although mainstream history books do describe some of these events, they don't emphasize the pattern which they were part of. This pattern consists of a steady stream of psychopaths lying, deceiving, and murdering their way to the top, which then resulted in the atrocities. This reoccurring theme seems to be the norm. Regarding this, Dr. Labatsky says, we usually reach the conclusion that the deed would not have taken place since the pathological factors sealed its occurrence or became an indispensable component of its origin. The hypothesis thus suggests itself that such factors are commonly active in the genesis of evil. He explained, within this interlocking structure, one kind of evil feeds and opens doors for others regardless of any individual or doctrinal motivations. Finally, he suggests, since pathological factors are present within the syntheses of most instances of evil, they are also present in its continuum. Because their willfulness is so extraordinary, and always accompanied by a lust for power, I suspect that the evil are more likely than most to politically aggrandize themselves, described Dr. Peck. Dr. Sabatini wrote, under stressing social situations, such as in wars, general poverty, and breakdown of the economy, sweeping epidemics or political fighting, etc., sociopaths may acquire the status of regional or national leaders and saviors. When they are in positions of power, they can inflict far more damage than as individuals. Professor Mars commented, yet, in public, they impress us as men who are likable, intelligent, refined, fair-minded, tolerant, thoughtful, kind, and gentle men who sincerely care about such matters as the environment, the plight of the hungry and starving overseas, the jobless, and the poverty-stricken. Moreover, they are often recognized as leaders in the legitimate quest for world peace and tranquility. He continued, many are active in church work and charitable organizations, others give freely to good causes. Recognizing this facade, He added, no one would suspect for a moment what actually goes on in the deep, dark recesses of their diabolical minds. Another extremely useful skill to learn is the ability to detect this pattern of decay in a nation under a pathological influence. Dr. Lebowski's book, Political Phonerology, explains this pattern in detail. He has experienced this process personally while living in Poland under both Nazi and communist occupation. Once you realize that psychopaths control America and the NATO nations, the reason for endless wars and never-ending turmoil becomes clear. Once you understand the nature of the psychopath, it makes perfect sense. When psychopaths rule a society, it will exhibit their traits. Generally, it will be heavily corrupted. But because deception is a primary trait of the psychopath, it will appear humane. Its traits can be observed from the highest level of government down to the street level. If you wanted to witness the madness of a civilization under psychopathic rule, you need not visit the state capital or a major city, because even the smallest village will exhibit these traits. When the controlling faction of society is evil, the sickness permeates into the lower levels. Immoral attitudes are projected, while moral ones are ridiculed and enemies are created. The destructive processes end with a holocaust, genocide, or persecution of some manner. The New World Order is such a movement. In November of 1975, Congressman Lawrence P. MacDonald stated that the most important issue of our time is the drive of the Rockefellers and their allies to create a one-world government, combining supercapitalism and communism under the same tent, all under their control. He warned that this drive is international in scope and incredibly evil in intent. Ross wrote, I don't know about you, but these activities seriously concern me because my children and grandchildren will suffer many times greater than we do today under the control of these evil monsters. He added, I've tried to find worse terms for them, but this is the best I can think of to describe them. When a nation or other organization begins this process of evil, psychopaths and other deviants are attracted to it like a magnet. Like-minded individuals are installed in key positions of influence. Regarding the current epidemic, this would include the federal agencies which are allegedly carrying out these COINTELPRO operations and hitting people with non-lethal weapons, as well as the citizen networks which stalk targets in public. As already demonstrated, you must capture the streets and a percentage of the population in order to install a dictatorship. To do this, a portion of the society is selected to enforce the dictator's rule on the street level. Historical evidence suggests that this portion usually consists of the core operational centers of a society, for example, factories, hospitals, schools, civic centers, religious organizations, law enforcement, utility companies, stores, etc. Dr. Lebowski described this in the following way. The actions of this phenomena affect an entire society, starting with the leaders in infiltrating every village, small town, factory, business, or farm. The pathological social structure gradually covers the entire country, creating a new class within the nation. This privileged class of deviants feels permanently threatened by the others. The others are apparently the people who have been targeted for persecution. It's very difficult to describe with words an event that must be experienced in order to understand. The event I'm referring to is the observation of the psychopath or psychopathic system in its true form after the mask has been removed. It can be described as something deeply horrific. This is a gut-wrenching experience for a normal person and can cause severe trauma, especially if they can't escape it. If someone has personally experienced such a nightmarish reality, says Dr. Lebowski, he considers most people who have not progressed in understanding it within the same time frame to be simply presumptuous, sometimes even malicious. This experience, he continues, is unceremoniously rejected by people and becomes a psychological burden for him, forcing him to live within a narrow circle of persons whose experiences have been similar. This encounter with a psychopathic element has been the experience of many mobbing and hidden evil targets across the planet. McKinney wrote that one objective of these harassment campaigns is to instill a perverted sense of loyalty toward the agency responsible for the harassment. This makes perfect sense when the pathological factor is considered. Sadistic control is also an element of perversion, wrote Dr. Malloy, which is an indication of psychopathic disturbance. McKinney also mentioned that these agencies appear to treat their targets as objects while harassing them. Psychopaths view people as little more than objects to be used for their own gratification, explains Dr. Hare. The weak and the vulnerable, whom they mock rather than pity, are favorite targets. This helps to explain the reports of people being targeted by the hidden evil for no particular reason, other than being decent. A psychopathic program will target such people. Just as the creators of this program are masked as humanitarians, the program itself is masked as beneficial and necessary. Naive individuals who participate may not immediately recognize this, but a percentage of those who control the weapons which torture civilians, it takes a psychopath to do this, as well as those on the lower levels who follow and harass targets, are psychopaths, and they're aware of the true nature of this program. That's why they joined. The outer layer closest to the original content is used for the group's propaganda purposes, says Dr. Lebowski. Average people succumb to the first layer's suggestive insinuations for a long time before they learn to understand the second one as well. Anyone with certain psychological deviations, he explains, especially if he is wearing the mask of normality, immediately perceives the second layer to be attractive and significant. After all, it was built by people like him. The pathological factor also helps to clarify why people who are, arguably, more spiritually and morally evolved than the masses are being identified and targeted. According to Dr. L., these types of individuals are the first to be targeted in regimes controlled by psychopaths. Dr. Malloy explained that the psychopath's perception of others' pleasure arouses only envy and greed in themselves, and that they receive gratification of sadistic impulses through intentional infliction of emotional or physical pain upon others. Psychopathic individuals, who never enter psychotherapy, are paradigms of this hatred of goodness, says Dr. Malloy. According to him, although envy is not consciously felt, it is the driving force for the motivation of their destructive behavior. He describes this behavior as manipulative cycling, which includes a mocking and controlling attitude while attacking their targets. The manipulative cycle, explains Dr. Malloy, both enhances his narcissism and protects his vulnerability. This cycle is ongoing because the threat to the inflated self is ever present. He describes this cycle as a purification process for the psychopath. The desire to control and degrade the actual object may be fueled by the sadistic pleasure inherent in the behavior, he says. The mocking and controlling behavior exhibited by these federal agencies against their targets appears to be part of the manipulative cycling which Dr. Malloy speaks of. This makes even more sense when we consider Dr. L's premise, which states that the controlling psychopathic faction of a society, the financial elite, will recruit lower-level psychopaths to do their bidding. These lower-level deviants naturally seek employment in law enforcement, security, the military, politics, or other positions which they believe will offer them power. A small portion of the population have a psychological makeup which is much different than most. They are completely aware of their difference. They also know that most people are not aware of this profound separation. The difference includes an emotional deficiency, accompanied by a lack of remorse, which allows them to operate outside of standard moral boundaries. They are also able to conceal this difference to some degree, and usually appear to be generous and friendly. They consistently engage in antisocial behavior, which includes destroying people's lives in order to feed their inflated egos. During this process, they frequently enjoy mocking their targets, which they see as weak or are envious of. They will inflict pain upon others for no reason other than the enjoyment of doing so. They span all levels of society. Some authors consider them to be a different species of humans. Psychopaths naturally gravitate towards positions of power. Many historical atrocities were caused by psychopaths. An organization or nation under a psychopathic influence will become saturated with its sickness. It will exhibit these destructive traits from the upper levels down to the smallest village. The hidden evil is a psychopathic program which exists in a society controlled by psychopaths.